The organic revolution, if we can, spread this across the planet, we are going to not only mitigate climate change, we're going to reverse climate change. We can restore the earth. But 40% of the world's surface is arid or semi-arid, nearly impossible to grow crops. Livestock grazing has overgrazed for a long time. So a group of Mexican farmers came up with a new system of agroforestry and holistic livestock management that we believe can be a game changer for a large part of the world. And it involves planting these agave plants. There's 140 varieties, but there's several that have huge biomass capacity. The agaves need the nitrogen-fixing trees, the native trees that put the nitrogen in the soil, put the nutrients in the soil, because these giant plants that grow so fast, they need that to grow. The ideal balance per hectare is 400 nitrogen-fixing trees, mesquite or acacia, and 2,000 of these for every hectare or every 2.5 acres. If you chop these up finely, the leaves, the pencas of the plant, in a machine that we have that's been invented in Mexico, it's a low-cost machine, you put them in closed containers and ferment them anaerobically for 30 days. You have high-quality animal silage, which is very low cost. So in other words, we can stop using in Mexico all this imported genetically engineered corn that's being fed to livestock. You can stop using the large amounts of alfalfa, which are so water intensive. We can begin to start using native plants, native tradition to feed the livestock, reduce the fossil fuel inputs into agriculture, and the other thing is that it's very healthy for the animals. There's something about this plant, once fermented, smells like kombucha or sauerkraut after 30 days. Animals won't eat it if you just chop it up now green. They'll smell it. They won't eat it unless they're starving to death, and it's not good for them. They can't digest it. But once fermented, the animals here, they love it. Cows are eating up to 20 kilos a day of this. These are grass-fed cattle. Our sheep and goats are consuming a couple of kilos a day to augment their limited rotational grazing. And they're healthier, they're fatter, they love the stuff. And so this is like discovering a new food source for animals that people have never known about before, because traditional people typically didn't have closed containers. They couldn't ferment something like the leaves of this. So this is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry taking what is considered garbage from the plants and using it for animal feed. And there's a lot of other possibilities. So we're really excited that farmers across Mexico are starting to adopt this practice of agave mesquite agroforestry or agave leucaena agroforestry, and we aim to bring this to the world. Mexico is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, because there's a lot of petroleum here, a lot of people, 130 million people. But the amount of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions in Mexico right now are about 659 million tons per year that are being emitted, okay? Yes, there's going to be a reduction in these emissions over the next 15 years, probably it'll be at half that amount in 15 years. But the point is, we need to start drawing down those emissions as soon as possible to reach zero net emissions and then go into carbon negative emissions. And we can do it with this agave, mesquite, or agave nitrogen fixing tree system. If you plant 4.1 million hectares with this system, which is quite feasible in Mexico because there's 60 million hectares of degraded land, arid, semi-arid, you could cancel out all the current emissions in 1 year. If we plant 10 times that many, or 40 million hectares, again, which is quite conceivable in a country that has 120 million hectares of degraded land. If we plant 1/3 of that, we will cancel out all the emissions for the next 10 years and go into negative carbon, within a decade. This system is not just applicable, this agroforestry holistic livestock management system is not just applicable to Mexico, Central America, large parts of Latin America, the southwestern US, Africa, India, parts of Asia, anywhere where you have limited rainfall and harsh conditions, where you have lack of access to irrigation, this system will work. We are going to, as we say, green the desert and get rid of rural poverty, and this is going to be a global, we call it the Billion Agave campaign, and not only mitigate climate change, but systems like this, the best practices of regenerative agriculture, whether it's reforesting the Amazon or Asian rainforests, whether it's regenerative rice growing instead of the current degenerative rice growing, holistic livestock management and grazing. We are going to not only mitigate climate change, we're going to reverse climate change, and we are going to do it in the next 10 to 15 years, these critical years when we must turn things around. We are disgusted, like most environmentally minded people, that our current multi-billion-dollar system of carbon credits and carbon emissions, carbon trading is basically greenwashing, and it's not. We're not reforesting the earth. We're not restoring lands. We're not sequestering carbon. What we're doing is providing a public relations opportunity for polluting corporations and enriching these middlemen, these carbon brokers, but very little is actually getting down to the farmers on the ground, the 587 million farms and ranches across the world. Organic agriculture is a very good idea, agroecology, so on. Everyone knows this now. Healthier food, healthier planet, healthier animals, healthier economies. But what if all the certifiers for organics in the world were corrupt and you couldn't trust the organic label at all? Well, what I would recommend doing is, well, then let's set up a new organic certification system that is truthful, that can be verified, that's based on science, not PR and greenwashing. One of our partner groups in Regeneration International and Organic Consumers Association is the Hudson Carbon Project from Hudson, New York. And this is one of the premier research farms in the United States, trying to figure out how we can measure sequestered carbon above ground and below ground in such a manner that the farmers of the world can be paid to turn their farms into organic and regenerative farms where they can make a decent living, but can also at the same time draw down enough carbon to start to turn things around with the climate crisis, and at the same time improve the land, what we call ecosystem services. In other words, we want land that's more fertile, that has more carbon in the soil. We want land that's like a sponge on an organic farm, where when it rains, it retains the rainfall instead of it rushing off or draining off. We want soil biodiversity as well as biodiversity above the soil. All these things. If we can restore a critical percentage of the world's 22 billion acres of cropland, rangeland, forest land, we can turn the whole climate crisis around and eliminate global poverty where it's most intense in rural areas. So what we're doing, Regeneration International with Hudson Carbon, is we're going to develop a new system of certifying regenerative practices so that people, if they want to donate or invest or use public money, or they can be sure that when we say we're reforesting, we really are. When we say we're sequestering carbon, we really are. When we say we're reducing water use and increasing soil fertility and increasing habitat for wildlife and increasing the biodiversity of microorganisms below the soil, that it's really true. The problem up until now in the regeneration movement has been it's too costly for small farmers and ranchers, herds people, to measure carbon in the soil. Only wealthy landowners until this point, pretty much, people with a lot of land, have been able to afford measuring carbon, and they're increasing carbon and starting to get some carbon credits for that, or money. We are developing a system now for agroforestry where you spend a lot of time doing measurements above ground. Like we measure the agave plants at all ages of their life, all species, all different soil types across the country. So we know at this point what a 5-year-old Salmiana crassipina agave plant in this north central Mexico, we know how much carbon it's going to sequester. We know how much is dry matter, how much is liquid, and so on and so forth. So if you just grow agave like the tequila industry does, for example, you exhaust the soil, and you see, like in the state of Jalisco, the World Center for Tequila, they're using glyphosate, they're using chemical fertilizers. They're a disaster for the environment, and small farmers aren't getting the money. These are big corporations that now dominate the $10 billion global tequila industry. So we're going to turn this all around. By carefully measuring above ground carbon in trees and other plants, we're measuring now cactus, trees, agaves in the semi-desert landscape. With a scientifically verifiable system, we can start to certify agroforestry systems across the world that are of strategic importance, and we're going to do that. Join up with us as we make this world-changing regenerative and organic revolution.